As I await my final crossing to the past, I ponder what role a scientist may play in so spiritual a matter as absolution. How in the alchemy of the soul, even repentance must necessarily be a calculated task. The builders of old tempered their mortar with blood to appease the most ancient of land spirits. We should have been so wise, yet it is not too late to learn.
Hey all, Siege here, and today we march deeper into the old piece, this time taking stock of Albrecht Entrati, his revealed endeavors, and further, to speculate on his perceived intentions, because, at least at this point, everything we're doing revolves around him. Remember, the Lotus, the Operator, the Drifter, Lloyd, the Cavia, the Hex, and the newly revealed group residing in La Cathedral have all been assembled for one thing: to enact whatever part of Entrati's grand scheme they've been left with most of them being forced into service. But amongst the Orichan, Albrecht was odd. Roth is quite forthcoming about how passionate the Orichan were, especially towards the end, giving into whatever desires their hearts could conjure and having no concern with how their enjoyment, dismay, excitement, or even straight up hatred of, well, really anything was perceived, at least among the ruling class of the Orichan. And interestingly enough, although not one of the seven, Albrecht is curiously commemorated in the very same way they are, more so in some areas even, with his statue being even more prominent within the current origin system than any of the other seven, which is incredibly odd for this society. Elevating one who isn't one of their highest doesn't happen often, and over them, well, let's just say everything we understand about them would suggest this to be near impossible. In reality, though, not only is his statue the most prominent, it's also the very first we encountered during the Awakening quest. The visage of Entrati, or what is at least largely assumed to be him, given what we are shown in the Necrolist regarding the Requiem words. And on the Zariman, where we can find Tuval's statue, Entrati is still much more prevalent. It appears in multiple areas all over the world, whereas the statues of the seven we saw, well, the ones in the old piece are the first that we've seen. Now, bear in mind, steps were taken after the downfall of the Orichan to write them out of history, if you will. And it is possible these statues were removed, but then, wouldn't have Entrati been essentially lumped in with the rest? Why was only his spared? Especially given that we don't even find out who this person is until after visiting Deimos, and even then, one must pledge a significant amount of work ranking up all of the syndicates to really begin to understand Entrati's story. Now, according to the accumulated information we've been given over the years, Entrati was, in fact, not like the others. Reserved wouldn't be the right term to use here. No, interestingly enough, the best way to describe Albrecht Entrati was indifferent. In a sea of overly eclectic people, Entrati was cold, as if the very world around him was better defined by ones and zeros than the ornate intricacy of everything the Orichan had accomplished. And then, of course, there was his infatuation with the void, something others even within their own scientific community believed was empty, and just what they had originally named it. A void of literally anything of actual value. Empty space, if what the writings about it say at least. And for some very odd reason, the Orichan felt it necessary to arrange a marriage for him to a woman named Gervain. The idea, of course, was for him to garner affection or attachment enough to other humans in the hopes that some of their love and support would in turn inspire a similar change within himself, to care about anything at that time. Anything to appear more familiar amongst the other Orichan. I feel like the extremes the Empire went to in an attempt to, for lack of a better word, humanize Entrati should not be discounted here. These were a people who generally only cared for themselves, at least for a large portion of the time they were in power, and to me, an act like this would essentially be done out of fear. Remember what I mentioned earlier about the odd statue situation? If that wasn't something Entrati changed through his time shenanigans, That would have to mean he held some pretty significant sway, and I believe the act of arranging a marriage for him to settle him down and perhaps garner some level of appreciation for human life, and at the same time try to temper his fervor with the void, neither of which in the end were successful, and dare I say the addition of another Entrati to help him in his endeavors, something else Roth illuminates us to, only cemented his path forward. Now with a young daughter equally as enthralled with his own void infatuation, and unfortunately, once his wife Gervain passed, there was no wife to take his attention away from it any longer. Aside from her name, we know almost nothing about her. And the way he is described to behave after her death, perhaps above all else, confirmed that Entrati was, in fact, weird and would remain so no matter what. What I find most interesting here is that what's insinuated is his own indifference was a part of his personality long before he ever made his way into the void. It wasn't some incident, at least not one that Roth is aware of, that changed him. Because that's usually what occurs. Good people are typically turned indifferent over time. Their own struggle against what they deem the forces of evil turn them cold. Because the longer they fight, the more many of them realize the damnable misery of it all. That in the game of war, it takes indifference to really win. In fact, we find ourselves in a very odd position at this point. When we do finally find Entrati, what happens then? Those residing in the Sanctum have a kind of mixed bag of feelings about him, with Tagfer and Roth wanting a level of vengeance against him, Fibonacci and Marie openly wanting to welcome him back, the Lotus seeming to also be awaiting his return, and Leon, Bird 3, and Lloyd being on the fence yet on the matter, not really making their true desires surrounding Entrati's reappearance fully aware yet, offering what I would call unclear intentions, at least at this point. And then there's the operator and the drifter, the Captain Willards of this particular story. For those without the proper context, Captain Willard was the protagonist of one of the most thought-provoking pieces of cinema I've ever seen, Apocalypse Now. Willard is tasked with assassinating Walter Kurtz, a highly decorated and extremely effective colonel deployed during the Vietnam War. Willard's character is briefed on this Kurtz exploits, that he essentially abandoned every aspect of what had been established as rules of engagement, becoming incredibly ruthless with his methods of war, exclusively implementing horror as his weapon of choice, but had also become revered within a small village there, almost looked upon as some kind of god amongst them all. And when Willard finally meets him, Kurtz first takes him as a prisoner, but more than anything else, to have the ability to speak person to person to him. And he has what I would consider a very relevant monologue here. He says, "You have no right to call me a murderer. You have a right to kill me. You have a right to do that. But you have no right to judge me. It's impossible for words to describe what is necessary to those who do not know what horror means. Horror has a face, and you must make a friend of horror. Horror and moral terror are your friends. If they are not, then they are enemies to be feared. They are truly enemies." I remember when I was with Special Forces, it seemed 1,000 years ago. We went into a camp to inoculate the children. We left the camp after we had inoculated the children for polio, and this old man came running after us, and he was crying. He couldn't see. We went back there, and they had come and hacked off every inoculated arm. There they were in a pile of little arms. And I remember I cried. I wept like some grandmother. I wanted to tear my teeth out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I want to remember it. I never want to forget it. I never want to forget. And then I realized, like I was shot with a diamond bullet right through my forehead. And I thought, my God, the genius of that. The genius. The will to do that. Perfect, genuine, complete, crystalline, pure. And then I realized they were stronger than we, because they could stand that these were not monsters. These were men, trained cadres. These men who fought with their hearts, who had families, who had children, who were filled with love. But they had the strength to do that. If I had 10 divisions of those men, our troubles here would be over very quickly. You have to have men who are moral and at the same time who are able to utilize their primordial instincts to kill without feeling, without passion, without judgment. Without judgment. Because it's judgment that defeats us. Does this sound familiar to you?
What? Then how'd I be any different?
If you cannot sacrifice even this much, how will you do what comes next?
What's he talking about, Marty?
Maybe I won't.
Are you more a child than your other? Do you think I am not haunted by these choices?
Albrecht has essentially taken up the exact same path, especially when addressing his known exploits after being exposed to the void. The countless creatures he's sent in there to their deaths, based on a loose theory that he could devolve the indifference. Creatures we may even have a kinship with. Kubros, or dogs. Kavats are essentially cats, birds, fish. These are creatures we have in our homes, that we love.
In answer, I resolved to hurl into the void minds that were not human. Let it parody them. The proximity of the bestial would force a humbling devolution. Or so I thought.
Then, of course, there's the increasing number of humans he subjected to the helminth and subsequently turned their lives upside down. The ones becoming friends and even lovers to our character. These are real people, most of which weren't given any kind of choice. Instead, being, for lack of a better term, drafted into an unspeakable war. Even the ones he's cared for most, his daughter, taking her under his wing, and while Roth considers it a kind of forced internship, I'd rebuke that in how deeply she immersed herself in it, even potentially surpassing Albrecht in knowledge, showing she, if nothing else, was drawn very deeply to her work. So she couldn't have hated it that much, you know? Well, he's abandoned her with the rest of the family, something that was meant to be permanent. Now, while his intentions have appeared to be thwarted numerous times, he has made the case that him leaving Lloyd and those at the Sanctum was done out of necessity rather than desire. And perhaps he really is just telling us the truth. After garnering more of an understanding concerning his practices, I think what he is can be defined as a deeply flawed individual who has unfortunately blinded himself to everything but his mission. And it's this that makes him so dangerous. A concept I believe even escapes his own understanding. He has embodied exactly what Colonel Kurtz had described. Perfect, crystalline, pure. That there is no method he will not employ, should it even be potentially or theoretically effective against the indifference. There is no one he will not sacrifice to achieve this purpose. There's no timeline he would question altering, or even bringing catastrophic ruin to, should he feel it might offer any level of success against the void. And I have to say now that it might not be because he doesn't care, but precisely the other way around. Reading between the lines here shows a man who is incredibly insecure, deeply fearful, and yet unquestionably intelligent. Perhaps too intelligent. And intelligence, unfortunately, provides fertile ground for, let's say, a great palette of potential external dangers or internal deficiencies to choose from and even associate with in this state, especially under extreme circumstances. Most notably, being himself horrified by what he believes he's done.
Too craven to chase death, I awaited it. the father of fears, and yet I was still afraid. The currents whispered, "Coward." I clenched my body into a fist as a fetus must and blinded myself afresh. Stark pain smoked the juice of my living tomb. Why did the saga not end by itself? Why must I still act?
And it's true. I can only imagine what kind of terrors the indifference could yet manifest that maybe only Albrecht has even considered, or who it could take from him. While not condoning or condemning, I can fully grasp why he felt it so necessary to leave the sanctum forever. If the Void was in fact desperate to find him, how long before it would essentially find Lloyd, Illyria, any of his grandchildren? I almost wondered if the reason he seemingly abandoned his most precious ally, Kalimos, to our flat in 1999 isn't just another example of him believing she to be in danger now too, at least in his presence, and being better to stay away from her as well. I speculated that in the past, many of Entrati's plans seem to have failed in either containing the indifference or doing what he originally intended. And while I initially postulated he perhaps wasn't quite as smart as he believed, I want to offer now a more measured reason here as to maybe why. He's not necessarily making mistakes because he's incompetent. He's making them because he's desperate. He's trying any method he can because he's scared to death of the Void. And I believe he shows the very distinct signs of never really getting over the initial trauma he experienced, voiced quite brilliantly, I might add, within the Requiem words added diary logs. And I believe what he reveals in the aftermath of this incident confirms such a fear, openly admitting that shame, not courage, is what focused his efforts. Shame that his own daughter was doing what he was too fearful to, needing this inspirational push from his own offspring.
Shame is an inert state, but fertile. It primes the mind, bolstering it for repentance. I had thought to make a difference in Duviri, but Duviri had made a difference in me. My own daughter's creations, reverberating and growing in the womb of the Void, had shown me another path than that of the indulgent coward. I was neither helpless nor irredeemable. Like she had, I could fight.
It's really amazing what a parent will do if it means providing the right example for their kids, and I think under that mentality, they will confront, well, anything, even when fully knowing it may be the last thing they ever do, and that's perhaps the piece I've never truly noticed about him before. After all, miracles do require sacrifice in this world, do they not? And what greater sacrifice is there than never being able to see your family and loved ones ever again? Don't forget, with the Orokin, their lives are much longer than the paltry 100 years we might get if we're lucky as a human. No, I see a man who is scared to death of this entity and is even more frightened for what it might do to those he loves. And at this point, he will employ every bit of his own indifference, savagery, or even horror to counter it should the situation require such a thing, to oppose the monster he believes he unleashed upon the universe. He's already been to 1999 in an attempt to remake the timeline with a very particular cataclysmic event. He's been to Tao's past in order to literally pluck the most important member of Nitok's insurrection attempt, something that would have drastically changed the course of Orokin history. He's been to Duviri, constructed a full laboratory there, and in the process has frantically elucidated the dangers of the Void to the general populace, as well as how to be prepared for it. He's facilitated the creation of titanic versions of Ballas's Warframes, the vessels, using the genetic material of what's assumed to be Arthur and Aoi, although I still wonder if due to the nature of her specific connection to the infestation and being Arthur's sister, my precious Eleanor wasn't also included in these experiments. combining their makeup with the excessive growth capabilities of the specific gray strain of the infestation that has evolved on Deimos. And again, I must mention the countless humans he's pressed into becoming Warframes, many of which against their will, and all of them experiencing incredible pain amidst other side effects of the Ballast Helmet syndrome, with a full transformation to a Warframe most likely still waiting for all of them at the end of the road. The newest of these souls that we know of, stolen from the 1800s, are two incredibly troubled yet equally devoted followers of what many in the current origin system would call a dead religion, but not before himself intensely studying it and becoming an active member of its order, only then to whisk them back through time to the sanctum in order to coalesce with the demon Warframe. By the way, I just have to mention this. Did you notice this picture here above the entrance to La Cathedral in the sanctum? Did Tagfer do this? Why is this here? Oh, and of course, the mountain of evidence suggesting that the cataclysm I originally spoke of in 1989 was not only of his doing, but so was the accompanying plague that had infected the population of Halvania. Much like the animals he originally sent into the void, he's piling up bodies with no real regard to the effect any of this has on anyone, with the operator and drifter essentially cleaning up the mess he leaves in the process. And I have to wonder now if he's ever really considered the correct body to sacrifice may have always just been his own.
The very last breeding pair of Serviulites was smuggled to me, causing Lloyd no small inconvenience. A species on the brink of extinction. Here was the uniqueness the Void sought. I was certain to the pit of my entrails. I loaded the pair onto their Seriglass bridal barge, along with an expendable avian and a Norg for mental ballast. Fish, fowl, and beast. A facile equilibrium. They did not die, save one. They came back changed. Witnesses, pilgrims even, chanting freakish praise to the one beyond the wall. I knew then that my gambit had lost. So long as I worked through scapegoats, my guilt would only deepen. I must atone for what I had done through my own blood.
I can't say this for certain, but with the idea of angels, demons, and the like permeating the origin system now, and with all the talk of Lua and Saul, gods, and the concept of a kind of demiurge even, I can't help but see biblical aspects to all of this, maybe even associated with another one of Entrati's little quirks, the names he uses as alibis in different times. While parading around Halvania, he took on the moniker of Dr. Friday, postulating himself as some kind of religious figure, proof of which can be found with this very odd imagery posted all over the area, with a single word in Orc and believe punctuating his Vitruvian pose here. And interestingly enough, he then decides to take on the title of Cardinal Dimanche, or Cardinal Sunday, in 1899. Now, you could make the argument that these are merely aliases, and perhaps we will come to learn that with each area he visited, he took on a different name of the week, maybe as a way to remember all the different titles he's given himself in a specified manner. And this is probably the reason, given that Friday is the first day of 1999 and Sunday is the first day of 1899. But as far as we know, he didn't take on the same kind of naming convention while in Duviri, instead being known as the Scholar there. But more than that, his work with the proto-frames, seeming to take tortured or broken individuals and giving them new purpose, at least from his perspective, might very well be a reference to another religious figure of some renown. Do you know what the harrowing of hell refers to? This is the period of time that Jesus Christ descended into hell and pulled the righteous from Sheol, or Hades. This said to be the place of still and dark, better known as death. These souls being held since the dawn of time. It's even said amongst those he retrieved were none other than Adam and Eve. And on the third day, Sunday, he ascended. Now, I'm not saying Entrati is anything like Jesus Christ, because he's almost the farthest thing from it, but in his own mind, I wonder if his relationship with the concept of Christ had deepened over time, feeling that they were both villainized, persecuted, spoke truth to power. And while I vehemently disagree with this association in literally any meaningful way, I can see him taking on this persona.
I went among the denizens of the plague year like a savior, my hands filled with healing.
The depictions he takes on even appearing to insinuate as much. And after all, according to him, he's only doing what must be done. In the end, if there is any truth to this little bit of speculation, I wonder if he perhaps missed the one aspect of Christ that may be the only real way of accomplishing what he wants, which of course is a willing sacrifice of himself. It's really the one thing he hasn't tried, and I believe it's solely due to the singular emotion that put him in this spot in the first place. Fear. What waits for Albrecht Entrati on the other side at this point, when he is finally truly dead? I would argue his very words show his obsession with making things right before that happens, because the cost could be very steep, and even more so now as the years have passed and his actions have become more excessive. Now, Roth believes that the void entity is a conjuring of our own, and that we are actively feeding it with the sheer volume of emotions that he and we, amongst others, are continually offering it. And I must say, if we consider what Nessie said in Dufiri, whether or not he's right about its origin, being a created god of the void, or an impossibly old demiurge finally enacting its will, it's after him specifically. And I don't think his mortal death would offer him the ability to have the free will to counter it should it occur. But I still do wonder what would happen if he were no longer there to find. Would his doppelganger just disappear? Its seemingly desperate search for him would certainly be removed from the equation. That's incontrovertible. And there's been really no evidence to suggest this entity had plans for any other individual, aside from perhaps our operator and drifter. And yet even then, most of its dialogue toward us is in reference to stopping Entrati. I have to tell you, it really makes me wonder about all the doppelgangers in the end. Without a host, do they continue to exist? Spoilers here. At the end of Apocalypse Now, Captain Willard does in fact carry out his mission, terminating Colonel Kurt's command for good. And in the aftermath, those that followed him then pledged their allegiance to Willard. And I'd be remiss to say I don't see a similar thing shaping up amongst those previously in service to him and what they're increasingly considering us. Are we in fact on the same journey as Willard? With potentially the same end goal? One we just haven't figured out yet? And what if Entrati's increasing fear of the thing he created is the exact thing that continues to make it stronger? What other plans does he have in mind or has already put into motion that we just haven't seen yet? Roth continually makes the case that our entire existence is summed up as nothing more than a kind of janitor for Entrati's actions in his crusade against the void, whatever that turns out to be. And I wonder if, regardless how bad the void entity was, is, or can be, even if we can suppress, defeat, or dare I say, kill what now exists, with at least a portion of itself built upon the very worst parts of Entrati, does that not leave the source of the problem still firmly within our reality? As mentioned, the Aura can live for a very long time, and Roth has made the case that the tedium of forever tends to make them curious and get into all kinds of trouble in the process. So how long before he, like any other Orcan, begins to believe he can harness the void properly, this time without the monster?
I'd figured it out. How the Zaraman could jump all the way to Tau in one big, bold leap, disabling the safeties in sequence. If I had it to do again, we could make it.
Are we to be his babysitter forever? Or are we to terminate his command as well in the end? I leave that up to you. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this bit of an update surrounding Albrecht Entrati and what else we've come to learn of his deeds. And it got you thinking about who the real problem here is. Who in your mind is the greater threat? Is it the Void or Albrecht? As always, I'd like to thank the channel's members. I don't have the words to accurately describe to you how appreciative I am of your support, but also just how blessed I am to know you value my content enough to continue to help out as you do. For this, I am and will forever be eternally grateful. Also, I can't forget my longtime channel support in G Fuel, a product I still use to this day. Given its longevity on the market, I believe that in itself speaks to its actual effectiveness and preference among many who, like myself, need a bit of a mental boost at times. So, thank you to both, and again, thank you to all who support the channel from the bottom of my heart. At any rate, I hope you all have a wonderful day today, a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you on the next one. Take care, everybody.
Bye.